Rohit Talwar, the CEO of Fast Future. Thank you very much for joining me and joining us at Phocuswright Europe 2021. Really appreciate your time, Rohit.
My pleasure.
You and I spoke in August of last year for our New Reality With series, and we'll post a link to that interview in the article that accompanies this replay. And it remains one of the most kind of interesting interviews that I did last year for a number of reasons. One, because we all thought you were very smart and had some interesting things to say, but but there was a lot there that was kind of, if things pan out the way they do, X scenario might happen and Y scenario might happen. So I'd like to start off, Rohit, by asking you of economic recovery for the industry, and there were four. There was the long goodbye, there was the VIP economy, there was the safe but hungry, and there was inclusive abundance. And they range from the first one I said being pretty doom and gloom, and the last one, inclusive abundance, being, you know, the best case scenario. With the benefit of hindsight 10 months on, Rohit, do you have a sense of where we are at the moment with those kind of drivers of economic recovery before we dive in, please?
Yeah, I think we're now down to probably three main scenarios. I guess the most exciting one for everyone is that roaring 20s type inclusive abundance scenario where everyone's boats get lifted and we see a wide range of innovation, people's spending gets unlocked, industry starts investing again, and everything moves at pace. We invest in the green industries of the future, we create new jobs, we manage the transition to more digital, we take up crypto and blockchain more. So that's the really exciting one. The middle one is the kind of K-shaped economy where the top leg is kind of what I talked about, but for the wealthiest. The bottom leg are the people who get left behind, and that could be a significantly large segment. And then the third scenario is one that certainly a lot of economists are really starting to talk about, which is a prolonged depression. And that's really one that none of us like to talk about, but it's probably the one that we need to do the most thinking about, that says, what if this is the new normal? What if we're down 50, 60, 70% on where we were in 2019, but on a prolonged period, other than in key markets? So I think we've got those three scenarios. Focusing on that worst case one, I think, is really important to make sure we've got options. But obviously, we're all hoping for the boom one. And that requires less thinking because we've got a lot of products there to service that.
Yeah, indeed. So the subject of this particular session, Rohit, was something that was drawn out of the conversation that you and I had in August. That was this idea that we may slightly unable to do, and there are those that can't do what they want to do because of the way things have unraveled. And I just wondered if you could talk us through around, through that idea that we might be heading for slightly unequal.
Well, at one level, the industry could say that's not really our prime responsibility. That's an economic issue, that's a social issue. It's up to governments to have the right kind of policies in place to help deal with the immediate crisis, to help people retrain for new jobs if they've lost them, provide some sort of guaranteed basic income, upgrade the social infrastructure, so that we can hand that to governments. I think the more enlightened players in the industry might say, is there something we can do in terms of product innovation that maybe allows us to create lower price offerings for those who can't travel, or even to leapfrog into new digital experiences using virtual reality, using augmented reality, to say, can we create a truly low cost offering that even people on the lowest level of income could still experience, even if they can't physically travel? So I think there's opportunity for innovation there, but obviously we require governments to deal with the more serious issues of upgrading people's lives and their incomes so that they can afford to travel in the future. So that's not the only reason for doing that.
Indeed, but give us your sense then of, or whether you're optimistic or pessimistic about all those kind of things coming together to stop an unequal kind of travel society, if we can call it that.
If we start with governments, I think we're going to see a patchy story around the world. Some governments are really already taking this very seriously. They've got a strong agenda, and they're really thinking through the next 5 years and how technology is the next challenge where it might replace jobs at a massive level. So they're thinking through the retraining, they're thinking through the income support. Other countries have a kind of wait and see or hope as a strategy, which is not going to serve them well. And I think we're going to see a very patchy story across the globe. For the travel industry, then the question is how you tailor your marketing message to different economies. In terms of the industry developing new products, I think it's challenging at the moment with so many having sustained quite a heavy loss in the last 16 months or so. To ask them to create ultra low cost products or to work in partnership between airlines, hotels, leisure providers, ground transport, travel agents to create these ultra low cost products and everyone give up some of their margin. I think we're asking a lot. So it's only going to be the bravest who do that. But that might also be the most far-sighted who say, if we create that now and we create some loyalty, then that could pay off in the future. One possible option here is to allow people to pay in cryptocurrency and to say, actually, if you pay now, cryptocurrencies are very cheap at the moment. Their value is going to go up in time. So if we can get you in a relatively low price, but we effectively have you pay for a few years, then we can afford to give you lower cost travel in the future because of the appreciation in your cryptocurrency. And one of the things that's supporting that is a number of countries are now saying they're going to make Bitcoin an official currency, a trading currency. El Salvador is about to do that. It's giving every citizen $30. It's giving them a free wallet in which to hold that. The president's been on TV showing people how to do that. And now you've got Paraguay and a number of other countries saying they're doing that. They're going to do that. So we're actually at a tipping point where people would have laughed at me 2 or 3 years ago when I talked about this. In fact, they were laughing at me 3 months ago. Suddenly people are waking up and saying, wow, even if someone just gave us crypto now, if we did nothing else with it, it's likely to be double the value by the end of the year. If I'd bought cryptocurrency, 10 years ago, if I bought Bitcoin when it launched in 2009, if I'd bought $1,000 worth of it, it would be worth over $100 million today. So far-sighted travel organizations are going to say, actually, there's very low risk to us. Filling up some spare bedrooms with people paying with Bitcoin or another cryptocurrency, there's only really upside because we're using spare capacity that doesn't cost us a lot. But actually, we could see a multiple return on that. And if you look in other sectors, that's happening. Tesla now makes more money out of the appreciation of its Bitcoin than it does out of selling its cars or its electric power systems. And more and more people are seeing this, that actually there's an opportunity here in the commercial world to rethink our business propositions to allow for the kind of appreciation in crypto. Contrast that with accepting, a fiat currency like the dollar, and basically whatever I get paid by you, if I hold it for a year, it's worth less at the end of the year.
Yeah.
So there's some growing realization, and that's how I think you could create products and offerings for the people, if you like, at the lowest level of income.
And we've talked about the economics of this kind of unequal travel world potentially. What about the kind of the cultural inequality? Often the traveling public kind of mirrors the way this is seen in society. Is there an opportunity here for us to think about mending those kind of unequal things that we sometimes see?
Again, it's difficult because if you're starting to address cultural differences, whether that's race, gender, identity, religion, whatever you want to talk about, that requires adaptation. That requires adaptation of service offerings, maybe meals, maybe even the language we use. So people don't feel excluded by our language. All of that takes time and effort to create and deliver. So whilst we can see the industry moving there over time, because I think it is a pretty enlightened industry. It does want to serve everyone. It does want to have everyone feel welcomed. I think it will take some time. I think it's probably the larger brands that will go first because they've got a bit more resource. But once they start to do it, then I think others will follow. But I don't see that kind of accommodation being a priority in the next 18 months.
Perhaps disappointing, some might say as well. I mean, if we can turn to sustainability, I wonder, we didn't really tackle sustainability when we spoke last August. I wondered if you could just give us a sense or your perspective, Rohit, on where you see the driver for a sustainable industry being met against the drivers for, just as we talked about at the beginning, an economic recovery, because some might say the two don't match. I mean, we had a very interesting session yesterday with the chief of a coalition of travel brands that's trying to do some good things, but then you've got the rest of the industry who are just trying to get back on their feet again. I mean, it's a difficult one to kind of tackle. Would you agree?
I think it is. The research we did last year showed that a lot in aviation in particular were using the time to start to think about how did they reduce their emissions footprint, their waste footprint, and their level of energy consumption. Everyone has the goal of getting to zero on all three of those, localized generation, etc. Obviously, the pandemic has hit a lot of people and it's not anywhere near as high a priority. But I think we will see more and more initiatives. And I think more and more of the stuff we can do at low or no cost starts to become very effective, like switching lights out in part of the hotel that no one's in, switching off air conditioning in that part of the hotel, switching off lighting, heating, everything in parts of the terminal. I know people will tell me there's all sorts of reasons why you can't do that, but that tends to be a lack of willingness to explore rather than technical reasons. I think there are two challenges here. One is at the national level, cities and nations are racing to get to zero again, particularly on emissions, and not fiddling it with carbon offsets, but genuinely zero emissions, in order to attract industry, in order to attract people, in order to really position their brand. Cities are doing that. You're also seeing a lot of corporates doing that. And that's a challenge because during the pandemic, a lot of the organizations that flew a lot of people around the world saw their footprint drop dramatically. So the management consultancies, the investment banks, the people who would have teams flying around the world suddenly discovered that they could do the bulk of what they needed to from the office or from home. Their clients are also seeing that. So the need to travel is declining. The incentive to travel is also declining because it helps reduce the carbon footprint. So the industry has a bit of a challenge in that as much as it wants to do all it can, it also needs to attract people back. But a lot of the people it's trying to attract back, particularly the higher value business spenders or business travelers, are acting now to say, actually, we can do a lot more virtually. So I think the industry is going to have to go through a massive rethink and almost leapfrog some of the ideas that it's been wrestling with for 5 years and starting to implement. It's now going to have to find radically new solutions that are moving the needle quite dramatically. And corporates pulling back on their travel might be the incentive that says, actually, we have to get to zero as an industry way faster in order to attract those people back and in order to attract the leisure traveler back in larger numbers.
Yeah, it's an interesting point, actually. And last of all, then, Rohit, if we can, I mean, there's on the Fast Future blog, you link to a very lengthy piece on the Politico site from early last year, where there was a collection of quotes and thoughts from academics and consultants and lots of learned people, I think would be one way of putting it. And I think one of the themes that I felt was very interesting was this kind of loss of innocence that the pandemic has created. We're a lot more, arguably more worldly wise. We're aware of what has been going on and how it affects us. And I just wonder, finally, then, I mean, do you sense that as a society, we are perhaps feeling that we are all in this together a little bit more, and actually altruism and the benefits of that, all for the greater good from an industry perspective, and of being more appreciative of our surroundings, is actually something that we can be optimistic about as a society and as a traveling public.
I hear a lot about this. I think what I hear far outweighs what I see. Last year, we were talking about, you may recall, we were talking about the need for the industry to collaborate and get its act together.
Yeah.
So that when travel opened up, you had consistent processes around booking, around testing, around airport procedures. And again, 16 months on, the level of collaboration is very low. The level of consistency is very low. So I think there's a challenge there. I also think that far from being a more coherent and cohesive and community-oriented society, what I see is that trust is down. Increasingly people are focused on them and their needs and what they want. You only have to see that in terms of people wearing masks and the attitudes to that and the attitudes to vaccination. So I think the industry, whilst it might hope for much more of the collaboration and coherence and trust, probably needs to work on how it operates in a world where all three of those have declined. And how does it work with people who don't trust, people who are kind of really only focused on their own needs, and people who really don't really care about what's happening to everyone else. They just want their part sorted. And that takes you towards personalization. It takes you towards more transparent processes where things like blockchain can help. And it takes you towards more and more clear, open and consistent communication so that there's no question of someone finding something to mistrust, that what you say is what you do, and it's backed up on a consistent basis by repeating both of those things.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, as always. I suspect we could probably talk again in about 6 months' time, get your perspective on how things are developing as the industry does, in inverted commas, recover. It doesn't feel like it's recovering sometimes, and sometimes it does. But excellent to have you on here again. Rohit Talwar, the CEO of Fast Future, thank you so much for joining us. We'll see you next time.
Thank you. My pleasure.